Okay, so we've got two cycles to look at today. One which you're going to be really familiar with and one which you probably aren't. We're going to start with the familiar one first, and that's the water cycle. Y'all probably remember the water cycle song and all that. So let's go ahead and talk about this one. I'm going to create land here, and let's do like a tree here on that land. So we're going to make it sloping to kind of help with the discussion. And then I'm going to put water here like that, and maybe a fish in there like that. All right, so we're going to start with these are basically terms that you guys know, but we're going to make sure that you know what term to use in what part of the water cycle. And so we're going to start off with a real simple one, right? We're going to start with evaporation. Okay. So I'm going to, and this can occur on any body of water, right? But we have evaporation. And then remember what happens when it cools down. We get condensation, since it's still a cloud. We get condensation, so evaporation to condensation because it cools down. You know, as it cools down, then what happens? It squeezes, it becomes more dense, and we get precipitation. Okay, so evaporation of water into the atmosphere, it condenses, and then as a cloud gets bigger and bigger and bigger and filled with more and more water, eventually it will precipitate. Now this is where we talk about unit 0, right? Because we know that what's supposed to happen is, remember that in here, I'm going to draw this in here, I'm going to draw like this, and then like this, we have aquifers and groundwater. So I'm going to kind of put this in here like this, and so once it hits the ground, what we want it to do is to infiltrate right into the soil and replenish our aquifers and groundwater, right? So this is infiltration, right? But that's not what's happening, right? If we're going to get some of that, but then we're also going to get a little bit of, let me change the pens out here, a little bit of what's called runoff, right? So we get some infiltration and some runoff, and if we get runoff, it's going to run off over the surface and end up back in a body of water, like in our case, the Gulf of Mexico. So this cycle is going to go on and on and on, and what we want to do is we want to evaporate, condense, precipitate, but we want to put that water back into our aquifers and into our groundwater so that we can use it. You'll always have a certain percentage of runoff, but what's happening is if we pave all this over, then we're going to reduce infiltration, and we're going to end up focusing on having more and more runoff, and that's not what we want. So that is a really basic description of the water cycle. Now the phosphorus cycle is one that you probably aren't familiar with, so let's begin with this one. Now I'm going to kind of emphasize a point. The phosphorus cycle is the only cycle, I'm going to actually make this brown, that does not really include the atmosphere. There's no atmospheric component of the phosphorus cycle, right? So we've got phosphorus is a hugely important part of living things. So we need it for that. I'm going to attempt to draw a fox here. I don't really know what I'm doing, but those are feet. Anyway, there's an animal, so phosphorus is part of that. This is rock. I'm going to kind of start with that. So basically, we know we need phosphorus in living things, including us. So if we eat any of the producers or the animals, we're going to get phosphorus. Where does phosphorus go? Well, it's in the backbone of your DNA. It is in your amino acids. It is something that you have to get, though, outside of yourself. You don't make it. So you have to, we're all depending on this phosphorus cycle for ourselves. Now I'm going to start off, I think, with rocks, because that is where the phosphorus cycle starts. It's all about the rocks. And basically what's going to happen is that the phosphorus is in the rocks and it's weathered. And the phosphorus ends up in the environment. And for example, this can then be absorbed into a tree or a plant of some sort. And then the animal eats the plant or the tree, and phosphorus ends up in that animal. We can eat that animal, and then we get the phosphorus. So we can start with phosphorus in the environment, going into the producers, and then going into other living things. Another way that we can get phosphorus is when living things decompose or create waste, we can put phosphorus into the system as well. So they can be dead things, right? And that can be a tree, for example. Let's say a tree decomposes, and then that is processed by microorganisms, and then that phosphorus can go back into that living thing. So it really starts with the weathering of rocks. That's where we're going to start the phosphorus cycle. But then that is going to get that into the soil and into our environment through the dirt, through the soil. And then that is going to end up being processed into plants and animals, which then we eat. Now, another really important source of phosphorus, and I'm going to color this in. This is sort of an aside, but it's significant, is bat guano. So that's my version of a bat. Bat guano is also incredibly rich in phosphorus, and so that guano can end up in the soil as well. So this is the atmosphere. Notice that there's no phosphorus up here. All of this is happening in the soil. We're weathering our rocks. It's going into the soil. It's being absorbed by plants and plants. The animals eat the plants, or the animals eat the animals that eat the plants, and we eat the plants or the animals that eat the plants. That's how we get phosphorus into living things. Those living things can then die, decompose, and go back into the system. All of this is happening in the soil. There is no atmospheric component of phosphorus in the phosphorus cycle.